So I was very amused at the moment because when the reference, I grew up, as you know, in South Africa, and we were at that stage quite, Brad, you want to take this? Thanks so much. It was the horrible times. I don't need to go through them with you. You know them all very well. And it really was very difficult. We were young students, young student activists, and the University of Cape Town featured quite prominently in our struggle against the ruling party at the time. But I do remember, and when Professor Kelly was saying about the hall of which he was warden, I remember very well that we had an amazingly big demonstration in Cape Town at that stage, and it was against the Section 6 of the Terrorism Act, which was a horrible thing that locked people up. But what had happened is that the university, in its extreme stupidity, had decided to ask the Minister for Justice to speak at the graduation ceremony at the university. This did not go down very well amongst any of us. So we got students from all over the country, we were part of the Union of South African Students, to come to Cape Town and to sort of sleep in Smuts Hall and to have a major demonstration. We pretty well knew our whys there, and our why was nothing less than the sort of total overthrow of the government, which didn't go down very well with the government. But one of the things was that a colleague, we were so outraged by what they were doing, so a colleague of mine who was studying classics at Cape Town University got hold of the scripts for the graduation ceremony, including the minister's appearance, and overnight managed to change. You know, there's the great student song called Gaudeamus Igitur, or Let Us Rejoice to Life, and all of that. And in that, there is a line in Latin, for all the Latin scholars that are listening to me, which goes, Vivat res publica, vivat res publica. Everybody says, vivat, vivat. And that was sung in universities all over the world, including the graduation ceremony at the University of Cape Town. However, at night, with the kind help of the Vice-Chancellor's secretary, who will always be in our debt for that, and without his knowledge, we got into the printing room and reprinted the document and put them in front of everybody. And you saw all these people, including the Minister of Justice, starting to sing Gaudeamus Igitur, Gaudeamus Igitur. And when they got to the line, Vivat res publica, we had changed the word to Pereat res publica, let the Republic perish. And you saw these lusty professors singing, perish the Republic, perish the Republic. And the Minister of Justice saying, perish the Republic. And the classics department almost on the floor, realizing that of all the student pranks, this is clearly one of the better ones. Anyway, I digress. But if anybody sends a WhatsApp on Pereat to me, you're in trouble. So we're going to talk about Know Your Why. You know the book, and I can't go into everything in the book, but I would recommend it to you for the simple reason that it probably answers more practically than some of the things that I can answer to you now. So let's just take a minute before we start. I want to ask you the simple question, which is great because it's been a refrain from Michael and from the Premier and also from Professor Kelly early on. So I want to ask you a question. I want you just to take a moment. If you've got a piece of paper, write it down. Or if you're more modern and you have a smart with you, you can put it in there. Why do you do what you do? Okay, why do you do what you do? That's the question. Now I'm going to give you a help. I'm going to ask you, do you do it for cash? Come on, be honest. Do you do it for cash? Do you do it for a career? You know, I want to be the head teacher of my school. Do you do it for a cause? I met Mike, everybody seems to be called Michael here, another Michael who runs part of One Life of this amazing church. And Wonderful of you to have us here today. Do you do it for a cause? Why do you do what you do? What are you doing when you get up? If you're perfectly honest, you don't have to have 3 C's in there. It just helps me to remember. Just a minute and a bit. You don't have to look at me. You can write it down. You can think about why do you do what you do? Now, if it's not too embarrassing, if you can't honestly answer that question, then it's not a bad, nothing bad about it, because what I want to say to you is this. You can work for cash. I have. It's good. It's good to work for cash. You can work for a career. I mean, I have. I wanted to do well in the financial world. You could work in a great cause. I did for Alpha, as we discussed. But here's the piece. If you don't know that you are called, if you don't know that God's hand is on you in any of these things, you will crash. There is no other way to it. And that's the secret sauce that I want to talk a bit about now. And I want to start, if I may, by saying this, that there's a verse in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. It goes as follows: being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. Or if you prefer Ken's translation, it goes as follows: he who began your core story will finish the story and bring it to completion. I want to talk about releasing your core story. Releasing your core story. And at the same time, with a slight play on the word, I want to talk about releasing your call story. Now, a core story is something that is of essence, something that is integral to you. I loathe the training, and I have to have a trainer to come in and ring the doorbell, because if I don't get him there to ring the doorbell, I will not get up. It's as simple as that. Unlike these enthusiasts who go cycling all the time, I don't think I'd be able to get myself the clips on, let alone pedal the bike. But he is always wanting me to deal with my core muscles. The problem about the core muscles is everything he wants me to do is extremely painful. And he has yet not managed to establish to me where they are. So core doesn't ring well with me, but it's core because I take his word for it. Everything depends on it. When I am 100, I shall be able to touch my toes and do all sorts of things. Actually, I'd like to do that when I'm 70. But anyway, but the core part is that whole structure within you that holds everything together. It's like the computer, like the system, the operating system of a computer. You can't see it, but if it's not there, nothing works. And the call story is that you are called to a particular story. And the story that Jesus is writing in our lives by the Spirit is a story. So I believe that there is in this room today, every single person who believes in Jesus Christ, in whom the Spirit of God is alive, that there is a hope waiting to be expressed, an idea waiting to be formed, a thought waiting to take shape, a concept waiting to be given strength to, a song waiting to be sung, a word waiting to be spoken. And that is the core of who you are. And the question is, how do I release that? How do I release a core story? I will tell you this, that to know your why is to tell your story. It's the same riff on the seed, just in case you didn't remember it. The seed needs to be planted. To know your why needs to tell a story. What is essential about a story is it has to be told. You can't have a story that isn't told. You can't just internalize it to yourself. It's not a story, it's a thought. And it's not a sentence. It's not a paragraph. It's not a chapter. It's a story. It unfolds through your life. And as you develop and you come to know your why, so the story modulates. It changes. It becomes exciting. It becomes dull. Not every moment of our lives is lived with a moment of high excitement. When people constantly say, I can't find my purpose in life, it is that you want a new purpose, a fresh purpose every second of every day, and it doesn't work 24/7. Your smartphone may be on 24/7, but your purpose isn't on 24/7. There is a downtime. There is a reflected time. There is a time to be able to listen and to hear. But the story will be unfolded, and like all stories, there are two words: the end. In the old movies, they used to have them. They don't anymore. Just to remind us, in the old days, that the sequel wasn't coming. The end. But the core story that is unfolded to us in Jesus, in the name of Jesus Christ and by his Spirit, will have no end. It will continue. Tomorrow morning, I would have the great privilege of speaking to people, or on Sunday morning or tomorrow morning, same place, speaking to people, or I will be in heaven. Are you sure that your story is on the path, that whatever happens tomorrow, there will be you and the unfolding of your story beyond death into life? That is the course. That is the greatest story ever told, was that Jesus Christ, who knew his why, he said, I know where I've come from. I know where I am going. And I'm taking you with me to co-write the great story of our time, which is the story of the redemption of mankind, of humankind. And that story is the most powerful one. And if you own your core story, it's the bravest thing you will ever do, is to make it your own and to work at it. And so I would say that in whatever sphere of influence you're in, or in industry, education, in politics, in media, the arts, in your home, in your family, for the sake of your church, for your community, for your city, and for your country, we need people who are filled with the Spirit of God, telling the story of their lives, co-written with the Spirit of God, for others to hear and to understand. Now, why is it complicated to do that? Because if you don't believe it from me, and I've had sort of 40 years being around, then take it from James Bond. The world is not enough. Trust me, or James Bond. The world is not enough. Because everything geared to us in the world is that we're looking for purpose and fulfillment, and we're trying to find it within a value system that we heard earlier on that doesn't really satisfy. And the whole cry in this harsh and competitive world is, what I want is, I want more. I want more. More of everything that happens to come my way. More, more. And more becomes the cry. Now, some of you, I know, watch movies regularly. I love The Greatest Showman. It's a great, lots of nods, I see. We'll see whether you can identify this and check out this clip.
I'm trying to hold my breath, let it stay this way, can't let this moment set off a dream in me, getting louder now. Can you hear it echoing? Take my hand, will you share this with me? 'Cause darling, without you, all the shine of 1,000 spotlights, all the stars we steal from the night sky will never be enough, never be enough. Towers of gold are still too little. These hands could hold the world, but it'll never be enough, never be enough for me. Never,
Never, never enough. I could hold the world in my hands. It will never be enough. And that's the narrative. That's the narrative of the world we live in. We're talking about changing the narrative of the story of our time. It is changing it away from the sense of, it will, the world will never be enough. And all that is happening is that we're fed all the time is a deep sense that, I can't make a difference. I don't know how to make a difference. And I want to, but I'm just not good enough. Maybe if James Bond doesn't do it, maybe if the Greatest Showman doesn't do it, maybe Usain Bolt might do it. Check this out. How are we doing?
Dismay. This is a horrible sight.
No. Sorry. Is there? Never mind. Put up. Israel will check it and see. So there's a sense of there being not enough. I'm not good enough. Andrew Garfield played in the film called Silence. It's a harrowing story of the way the gospel first came to Japan. And in order to try and find out why it was that all these people were prepared to be murdered and killed for their faith, he's not a believer. He said, I studied the life of Jesus and I fell in love with Jesus. And when he was asked what this was, he says, he reflected frankly and movingly, and saying, I come from the marketplace of riches, honor, and pride, that is Hollywood, wanting to confront a painful and persistent sense of my own not enoughness. There is a wound of not enoughness, the wound of feeling that what I have to offer is never enough. Do you know that sense? It's a wound. It's there. It's open. We scratch at it. It's just not enough. And he carried this not enoughness. And in the world's narrative says that in this wound of not enoughness, the way you fill it is simply by more. More likes, more money, more fun, more pleasure. And the more becomes a lure. It draws us away from the true understandings. And so it is very important for us to come to that real understanding as to what it is that we, as an alternative narrative, because to know your why is the essential part of releasing your core story. And it is more important to know your why than to know what or where or how or when God might use you to take on some particular task. The real question is, why? What is the purpose? How do I find and fulfill God's calling in my life? And that is the core piece. It's the core story. It's the core story of our lives. So let's just have a go at trying to piece together where and how we will start with this. Let me give you 4 words. They are 4 words that have really transformed my life, and they're the 4 words that I think would transform yours. And they're very easy to remember, because they're the same words with which the Old Testament starts, and the same words with which the New Testament starts. 4 words, at least if you allow the New Testament in Greek. The 4 words are, in the beginning, God. Or the New Testament, in arche hologos, in the beginning, the Word. So we can't find our core story. You can't find your why simply by digging within yourself. Self-help books, I have nothing against them. They may be helpful, but they're not going to enable you to understand the central calling of your life. The core story comes from God. So stop, reboot, rewind, reset. Go back to the beginning. Don't try if you say, I'm not sure of my purpose. Let me say that. I think there are someone here, maybe many more, who feel that you've come to the end of a phase of your life and you think that's the end. But the end of a stage is not the end of your destiny. You may have been a teacher for 20 years, 30 years, not the end of your destiny because you've come to the end of your teaching. Reboot. In the beginning, God, we start with God. And that makes an important difference. Coming back to John 15, let me read that to you again. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in my name, my Father will give you. Do you know, this is an extraordinary thing. Just think of those words. You did not choose me. You may think I've come to common ground, and I've made that choice. But God says, I chose you individually. And I've given you a purpose, a calling. I've given you a core story, your why. It's you, it's only for you. It's not for me, it's not for anyone else. And then he says, I chose you, and then the word comes in, I appointed you. And sometimes the word is, I appointed you. Sometimes the word is, I anointed you. But being a banker, I take the word simply to mean, I invested in you. And an investment is not just, it's not Bitcoin. You're not buying it now to flip it tomorrow. An investment is a house. It's an investment in something that over a long period of time. I'm not making a negative comment on Bitcoin. It might yet bring you untold riches, but you might lose your shirt. But an investment, say in a house, is a long term. Let me give you this example. Say, for example, you were chosen to play for the best football team in the world, Chelsea. And I take it by the laughter that you're supportive of this. No. Could there be a rival? Where's that? And just let's imagine for a moment, they said, okay, you're chosen, but there is no training, there's no nutrition, no arguments or discussions on how many cups of coffee will enable you to kick a better football into a better time or anything of that. Just imagine there's no gym. Well, what is the point of being chosen if you do not have the equipment, if you do not have the investment? None at all. But what Jesus is saying is that I have called you, I have chosen you, and I have invested in you. For whatever your why is, whatever the calling is on your life, he will give you whatever is necessary to fulfill that calling. He will invest in you enough to ensure that he gets the dividend from your life. He is, after all, the great economist. His investment is not for some wasteful moment. But then he goes on very specifically and says, I want to give you fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask, so go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. There is no such thing as a Christian that doesn't move, that doesn't plant, that doesn't act. Our religion is not one of quiet reflection. It is that we go. We meet the community. We work in the community. We go. And there we bear fruit. Riff back to the planting. We're bearing fruit. But not any old fruit. Fruit that will last. Permanent, longing fruit. Sustainable fruit. That's what your life and my life happens when we know our why. When we know why he has called us to do that, to bear the fruit that will last. But the world has a different value system. So you can live either by the premises of the world or the promises of the word. Which is it going to be? The world thinks it knows its why. It talks about grabbing, grasping, greedy. Those are the premises of the world. The promises of the word are giving, generosity, graciousness. It's a different way of being able to live a life. And at the end of the day, it is in order that we might live fulfilled lives, lives that are given by God, so that we might flourish. Let me tell you this. The choice is whether life will flourish or you will flounder. If you find your why, you will find your way. If you don't find your why, everything else will be in the way. Just the way it works. It's too difficult, it's too hard. You know, if you don't, as Professor Kelly was saying to us early on, if you don't actually start working the hard way and determined to see through the clinical trials that are coming, the hard work and selecting the research and all of that, everything will be in your way. But those like him who've persisted in doing it, at the end of it, they see the malarial cure coming. And nothing was in the way. Of course there were obstacles, of course it was difficult, but it was the sustaining energy to get through that that got to the other side. So if you've got a core story, you need to have that core story in the understanding that it's God's calling on your life. And I had the privilege of spending time with a small group of people meeting the Pope. It's a quite nice one to tick off the bucket list, including visit to Cape Town. We asked the Pope, why are you living in the sort of bed and breakfast, really, rather than in the palace, the papal apartments? And he said, well, you know, I like people. My mother made me that way. One word, people. That's his core story. What's yours? So my core story is one verse of Scripture, which is both in the letter to the Romans, but also in the words of Jesus, is that the Spirit gives life. The Spirit gives life. The Holy Spirit gives life to my work, to my economics, to my finances, to my family, to my future, to my friends, to my forgiveness. It is entirely life. Life-giving, hope-giving is what we as a community of people surely want to be doing. But you say to me, Ken, do you know what? I get the story, I understand it, but I'm going to get there by willpower. I'm invictus. I'm the master of my fate. I can manage. Or you may say, particularly if you're a millennial, whatever. Whatever. The ball bounces this way, I'll pick it up, and if it doesn't, whatever. God will do what God will do as long as I don't get in the way. And some are just wannabes. Do you know, I want to discover the real cure to malaria, but I don't particularly want to do chemistry 1. It doesn't quite work that way, does it? Let me tell you this. If you want to live your life purely by willpower, if you want to try and find your why and your core story by willpower, you will burn out. If you want to try and just say, oh yeah, whatever, my story will be whatever the story is, whatever the page is that I turn, that will be my story, you will drop out. And if you just say, I'm just have a daydream believer, I just want to be something out, you will fade out. But if you want to find a solution, then it is in worship where you break out. And worship is not just to be contained in the guitar case of a contemporary worship leader. Worship is what you and I do every day in our lives. We will talk more about it later, but for me, my worship station is my workstation. Where I work is where I worship. And we must never forget that that is indeed what God has himself ordained for us. So that it's in our worship when we align our wills with his wills, our hopes with his, our desires with his, our stories with the stories that he's created you and me to be able to tell to the world. And when we do that, we actually get this great story working together. Worship is not the soundtrack. It is the substance and the sustenance of life. Not the soundtrack, merely mood music, but the actual substance of our lives. And that is everything that I do, everywhere I go, everyone I speak to is an opportunity to tell a story, a good news story of my life impacted by knowing my why. But then you say, sure, but what happens when it goes pear-shaped? What happens when I fail? Not such a good story. Not a Hollywood ending. What then? Well, I know the experience. A few years ago, we, together with some very bright and well-gifted people in the City of London, we tried to form a new company, a new business. And we got the market wrong. It was a painful experience. It failed. We had to close it down. The time then was hard and difficult, the disappointment acute. I felt the pain then. I still do. But I learned something through that experience. And the first is I just beg of you to remember this. Never say, I am a failure. Because if you were to say, I am a failure, you would have to say that Jesus Christ who lives within you is a failure. And he is not in the business of failing. They thought he had failed when he died on a cross and he rose again. Now, of course, in reality, it is true that a relationship fails. Of course, in reality, it is true that a transaction fails. An opportunity doesn't materialize. Of course, those are true. But I am not a failure. The project is a failure. That is critical. And then 3 things I learned. First, do learn. Learn from what went wrong. Write it down. Journal it. How did I screw up? What didn't I listen to? Which voice was stronger in my ear that shouldn't have been? Second, don't linger. There's no point in replaying the tape. It just goes round in like a loop in your head. It just keeps going round and round and round. Don't keep praying. Don't linger. It's not going to bring it back. And the third is lean forward. Lean forward. Now, this is not some self-help theory I'm giving you. Lean forward because Jesus Christ rose from the dead. The hope is that tomorrow will be another day. It may be different, it may be harder, it may be better, but he will be there to sustain me through whatever might happen. So we lean forward into the hope that he brings to us. And that's how we learn to fail well. We need to fail well. Because guess what? Everyone's going there. Everyone's going there. We would all know the moments of failure, the moments of acute disappointment, the pain of recognizing that what I started in the best of intentions has ended. But it's not the end. The story continues. So we start with God. In the beginning, God, Jesus chose you, called you, equipped you to know your why. And then we realize that actually we can't do it on our own. That is why a church like this grows and flourishes, because we're a community of people that come together. Can't do it on our own. Let me show you a clip. This is just advance notice. In England, we have two brothers. They're the Brownlee brothers, and they are fiercely competitive triathlons. I don't know much about triathlon, and I don't want to do any of the three things, which is about the only thing I know about triathlon is the try as I may. I cannot do it. There we are. Ali Brownlee won the Olympic gold medal in Rio. And he was going after the world championship of that year, competing with his brother in Mexico City, a very high altitude city. And this is what happened.
Oh, goodness me. This is a horrible sight. Jonathan Brownlee has lost it now and has staggered to a stop at the side of the course, and Alistair's stopped to help him along. And Alistair is going to try and carry his brother home. Dramatic scenes in Cozumel as the Olympic champion carries his younger brother towards the podium.
Oh my God, I cannot believe what we are seeing here, Matt. Is this allowed? Is he allowed to help his brother? You know, is that part of the rules? I'm not too sure. We've never seen anything like this before.
Unbelievable scenes. Unbelievable scenes in Cozumel. To finish in second and third, but Johnny can hardly stand. And Alistair is having to drag him across the line and pushing him home for second. Johnny finishes in second.
Now, leaving aside the South African who streaked by, do you teach the parable of the Good Samaritan? Or You know, I say to myself, you know, here is the World Championship. If I had my brother there, what would I have done? I think I'd have put my arm around him. I think I'd do that. Because, you know, instinctively we have to realize that you'll only know your why in and through other people, and it's an instinct. If you trained yourself in an individualist, you won't do it. But Ali Brownlee put his arm around Johnny Brownlee, who was swaying, obviously under the suffering from altitude. But I think I would have got to the tape, and I would have looked around and said, bro, this is the World Championship. Do you mind? I mean, I brought you here. If it's all right with you, I'll just breast it and come through. But he didn't. Instead, he preferred his brother. He put someone else ahead of him. And Jesus Christ did the same for you and me. We were in the world, staggering from side to side, confused, as James was saying, muddled by drugs, by everything else, rocking around, not really knowing. And he put an arm around you, and he put an arm around me, and he enabled us to enter heaven ahead of him. He had the glory of the Father. He gave it up to come and to live with us. And in so doing, he established for us the purpose of life, the fulfillment of life. If you forget everything that I say, then remember this. God loves you, God knows you, and God has called you in this world. He knows you. Anything you did in the past, he knows. Everything you think you surprise him, he knows what went wrong last night for the one person who's listening to me. You know you shouldn't have done what you did, but that's not the end of it. He loves you. If you ask him for forgiveness, he'll forgive you now. And he called you. And that you need never say it's not enough. need never have that wound of not enoughness. Because not enoughness, we're never enough. But in Jesus Christ, by his Spirit, we can overcome whatever harsh obstacles there are in the way of being able to learn to flourish. The world is not enough. All it wants is to give you more likes, more money, more of the world's offering, and all it will do is distract you from your why. And what we want to do is to recalibrate and remember, to reboot, to know your why. Because in the beginning